Okay, so today we're going to talk about the six tastes, elements, and gunas. So these are some of the fundamentals of Ayurveda, but specifically about Ayurvedic nutrition and how our food, specifically the tastes, impact us physically and psychologically. So let's begin. So we'll start with the little gunas. The little gunas translates to the 10 pairs of opposites or the 20 attributes of substances, thoughts, and actions. So all inorganic and organic substances, as well as thoughts and actions, have definite attributes. Attributes and actions are closely related since the potential energy of the attributes eventually becomes an action or kinetic energy, which is released when the substance undergoes chemical transformation, such as burning or digestion. And that's from Dr. Vasant Lad. So, what he's saying essentially is that everything in the manifest universe is comprised or can be categorized and narrowed down into these 10 pairs of opposites. And from them, they eventually become action or kinetic energy when there's some sort of transformation happening, whether that's your metabolic functions digestively, or whether that's a seed pushing through the earth. There's different gunas or different attributes present in each of those actions or events. In Ayurveda, there is a law which states that like increases like. When similar qualities come together, the quantitative expression increases. So, for example, the summer season has attributes similar to Pitta dosha: hot, light, liquid, and mobile. Therefore, in the summer, Pitta in the body will increase. So, whatever gunas are most present in our environment, we'll just refer seasonally, those attributes also increase in us because our environment affects us so drastically. If you look at people who are born in different parts of the world, their body types, their structure generally is adaptive to where they grew up and the environment that they grew up in. The concepts governing Ayurvedic pharmacology, therapeutics, and food preparation are based on the 20 attributes. To heal, we use the opposite quality or guna. So all of Ayurveda, the whole system of Ayurveda, its pharmacology, therapeutics, and food preparation are based on these 20 attributes and using the opposite quality or the opposite guna to heal. And we're going to get more into that. But the main theme of this is that like increases like and opposites heal. Okay. This is the concept of the gunas, opposites heal. For instance, the opposite of air and ether would be water and earth. When there is an imbalance, generally speaking, we use its opposite nature to heal. So these are the 10 pairs of opposites that are present in everything in the world. This is physical world, this is in our psyche. So if you think of psychologically, depression versus anxiety. So depression, the sensation, the characteristic of depression is generally a lethargy, a heaviness, a stagnation, suffocation mentally, right? So in terms of these pairs, there'd be categorized as a heavy, cold, cloudy, dull, gross, static, dense, Okay, versus anxiety, there's a lot of movement in the mind. The mind is bouncing all over the place. So movement looks like a light quality compared to heavy. Cold as well. Clear in the sense that there's not a lot of sustenance or substance. There's not a lot of groundedness present in an anxious mind. There's just not clarity. There's just a clear quality to anxiety that keeps it from being grounded. Mobile, subtle, as opposed to gross or having a lot of sustenance or a lot of groundedness. So those are some examples of how you can begin to categorize our psychological components with the categories or the 10 pairs of opposites. So in our environment, seasonally, Pitta is present in the summer. Pitta is hot. Pitta has a little bit of oil. Pitta is considered mobile. So the qualities of summer, and it changes depending on where you live. If you have a more humid climate, then you're combining more of these gunas. Now let's talk about the 5 elements or the Pancha Maha Bhutas. Pancha means 5, Maha means great, and Bhutas means ghost or element. So the 5 elements, we'll go over each one. Ether. Ether manifests the idea of connection, allowing for interchange between all material mediums, communication, and self-expression. Ether, or Akasha in Sanskrit, means all-pervading, omnipotent. Ether can be understood as space. Everything exists within space. Excuse my typo. Without the ether element, no other elements or the manifest world as we know it would exist. That makes sense, right? Everything has to exist within some sort of container, and that is ether. So air, and we're going from the most subtle of the elements to the densest. So air is the second densest. Air manifests the idea of subtle movement, manifesting ideas of direction, velocity, change, and giving the basis for thought. Air manifests as electrical energy that keeps the body and all of its systems moving. The respiratory, cardiovascular, and activity in the brain are all a part of the air element. The air element is prominent in those functions. Prana, or life force, is the basic principle of the air element. Prana is the intelligence that moves the breath, and it's the flow of consciousness from one cell to another cell in the form of intelligence. Fire manifests the idea of light, allowing for perception and for movement from place to place. Fire is carried throughout the body, in the blood, and plasma is heat. Poor circulation results in cold hands and feet. Fire regulates understanding, comprehension, and discernment. Water manifests the idea of liquidity or flowing motion, allowing for life. The body's lymphatic system is governed by the water element, and water is the universal chemical solvent, and all biochemical functions are governed by it. Earth manifests the idea of solidity or stability, giving resistance in action or support in action. All solid structures, hard, firm, and compact tissues are derived from the earth element. Bones, nails, cartilage, hair, teeth, and skin are all part of the earth element. I just want to mention that hair might seem not like the earth element, but hair is categorized as a waste product from the development of our bones. And being that bones are largely comprised of the earth element, hair also gets categorized with it. That it's a byproduct or a waste product of the process of bones being built. That's a whole other topic of conversation. But just to maybe offer some clarity, not more confusion on that. Now, the elements are found in everything in nature, and they are the foundation of the doshas. Each dosha is comprised of different elements, resulting in unique attributes, strengths, and weaknesses. Like the doshas, each person has a unique ratio of all 5 elements. So we have all 5 of the elements in us. We have to have all 5 of them in us in order to exist, but they're present in different ratios for different people, just like the doshas are present. All 3 doshas are present in different percentages. It's important to keep the elements balanced for optimal health. For example, an increase in fire element can cause fever, anger, ulcers, and burning sensation. Increased water can cause edema. Increased earth can result in obesity. So this is a chart. This is our first chart. We have several charts in here. I think they're really helpful to have the visual graph to be able to go and look at this, draw some connections. So we have our doshas, Vata, Pitta, Kapha. Vata is comprised of the air and ether elements. The gunas present in Vata are light, mobile, cold, rough, hard, subtle, and clear. So when we think of that in a person, let's give it a context. So a person with a lot of Vata, that means they have a lot of air and ether, and they have a lot of these gunas. So what that can show up in is a lot of movement, physically and mentally. People with Vata tend to move a lot. They can be dancers or creators, can be drawn towards sports or activities that have to do with being in the air, like acro yoga or aerial silks or whatever. I mean, parasailing. That probably has a little bit of pitta in it because that's got to be an adrenaline rush. So they move a lot. They talk a lot. Their brain is constantly going. They have tons of ideas. They tend to be very creative people. They can be artists in various forms, glass artists, painters, singers, dancers, what have you, creative. So the air and ether elements prominent in a Vata person, they are more connected to the ethers. And so they're more perceptive to the subtle realms, which is largely where our creativity comes from. And so when you have more air and ether in you, there's a good chance that you're a very creative person in one way or another. So as far as understanding how that shows up with the gunas, the light and mobile qualities, I think these are and subtle. These are big keys. So when you think of categorizing someone who talks a lot, who moves a lot, who's very creative, if you want to give that a quality or a name, light, mobile, and subtle. Subtle, someone who talks a lot, maybe you wouldn't categorize them as being subtle, but think of subtle in terms of light even. When there's heaviness in your nature or the way you talk, then you're more grounded. There's a steadiness. Whereas if there's more subtlety, that can result in more flightiness, or there is the outcome when someone has more ether than they do air when they're a vata. And the way they talk is not necessarily fast and sporadic, but it's still very etheric. It's more slow and kind of flowing and light. They can speak very lightly. It'd be hard to hear them. That's more prevalent with the ether element. Okay, pitta. The elements are fire and water. It's just a little bit of water. It's mainly fire. Think of the water when it comes to pitta as the oil for the oil lamp. It's just a little bit of juice to keep the flame going so it doesn't burn out. So the guna is hot, sharp, soft, cloudy, rough, mobile, light, and oily. So it shares some similarities to vata in terms of the mobility, the lightness. So vata and pitta, neither of them have any earth. So they're the least grounded. Vata, the least grounded of the three, of course, because it has no water or earth, but pitta has a little bit of water. So they tend to be a little bit more grounded. So how these qualities show up in a person, sharp, I think that one kind of sums up pitta pretty good. Someone with a lot of pitta, they have a very sharp mind. They can also have a very sharp tongue. So they tend to be intellectuals, very analytical, left-brained, CEOs or leaders in some way. They tend, when they're balanced, they have a luminosity about them that really draws people to them. People want to follow them. People want to learn from them. We're just going to stick with the positive aspects right now. For kapha, the elements are water and earth. And I'm really just going over some of the psychological aspects of how this shows up, as I'm assuming that we've gone over the doshas in more depth. If you're seeing this presentation, then we've probably already talked about the doshas in depth. So just a little overview, reminder. So water and earth are the elements in kapha. That ends up looking like heavy, dull, soft, gross as in sustenance, not like you. Smooth, oily, cold, static, cloudy, and liquid. So all of those qualities compared to the qualities of air and ether, right? That kind of makes sense, that water and earth would be categorized as heavy, soft, smooth, cold, oily. You could say unctuous, just where it just popped into my head. Okay, so now identifying the elements in ingredients. So this is where it starts to get, well, it's all fascinating, right? But this is where you really start to look at your food a little bit differently. And when you understand yourself, when you understand your constitution and your imbalances in terms of the doshas and in terms of the elements and in terms of the gunas, then you can start to look at your food and what elements, what gunas, what doshas are present in your food, and then choose your food according to the opposite. So if we're increasing the opposite qualities, so we already have too much of something that's causing an imbalance, and we want to apply the opposite. This is another chart that's helpful. So all food is comprised of different elements, taste, and gunas, just like us. Different foods nourish different tissues and promote different physiological and psychological effects. Thus, there being a strong emphasis in Ayurveda in eating foods that are appropriate for your particular doshic imbalances. So that's one of the really exciting and powerful things of Ayurveda, is that especially in the preventative side of Ayurveda, we focus so strongly on diet and nutrition because that is what will heal the root cause of imbalances, is diet and lifestyle. And then we get into herbs and other therapies, but diet and lifestyle are the root cause of imbalances and disease. And so we start there in order to affect our physiology and our psychology, which is amazing that food has that big of an impact and that we can use it systematically according to what our body needs. Okay, so the earth element, some examples of where you would find the earth element, and just keep in mind some of the qualities of earth associated with earth. Okay, so most kinds of nuts and seeds, meat, mushrooms, root vegetables, beans, white rice, most grains, coconut meat, hard-dried fruits. Water, some examples would be milk and dairy products, juicy fruits, coconut water, juicy vegetables. Juicy vegetables, so cucumber, burdock root, carrots have a good amount of water content. Zucchini, tomatoes, there we go. Salt. Salt has the water element contained in it. The fire element can be found in things such as most spices, especially hot peppers, black pepper, cumin, cinnamon, cloves, ginger, asafoetida or hing, garlic, onion. So things that are pretty pungent, they smell pretty powerful, right? But even just most spices in general. I mean, rosemary, oregano, the Italian spices, Mediterranean spices, Middle Eastern spices, they all are going to have fire in them. Sour fruits such as pineapple, lemons, grapefruit, tamarind, sour berries, alcohol, and tobacco. So all of these things are going to increase the fire element. Air element can be found in things like dried fruits, raw vegetables, rough vegetables such as broccoli, cabbages, vegetables in the cruciferous family, which includes broccoli, cabbage, asparagus, cauliflower. Sprouts, nightshades, those all have the air element in them. And most beans have a lot of air in them. Now, I'll just mention that just like we have all the elements in us, all of the elements exist in everything in different ratios. So beans, for example, have air in them, but they also have earth in them. But they are mostly comprised of air. And that's not something you would know or that's obvious necessarily. That's something that you will learn over time as you become more familiar on how to identify, and certain things will just be from memory. Now, ether can be found in things such as sprouts, fresh raw vegetable juices, algae, and spirulina, alcohol, LSD, marijuana, cocaine, tobacco, anesthetic drugs. So these are some examples of foods that have certain elements. Okay, so assuming that you have an idea of what your imbalances are, And that means if you're looking at it from the point of view of the elements, which element you're trying to balance, if you have a excess amount of earth and water in you, then you're going to want to avoid these foods as much as possible. And we're going to go into more detail the further we go here. Okay, so the 6 tastes and elements. The 6 tastes are formed from the various permutations of the elements. Although each taste contains all 5 elements, the particular combination determines the nature of the taste. So every substance's unique combination of attributes, aka the elements, taste, and gunas, these all influence its action in the body. Taste can have a long-standing effect on the doshas, creating either therapeutic or unbalancing actions on the body and the mind. Each taste has a psychological component, creating a positive or negative influence, which will become apparent with frequent usage. So as you become more familiar with these concepts, with the elements and how they show up in us physically and mentally, then you'll be able to identify it in yourself and maybe even in others, like, oh, they've got a little bit of an imbalance with their fire or their air or their earth. Okay, now the psychology of the 6 tastes. Now this is, I think, one of the most important factors. There's, of course, a physiological effect of these tastes, but I didn't go into that in this presentation because it's a lot and I want to focus on the psychology of it, because I think feeling these effects in your body and being able to recall how you feel after eating foods that are categorized in different tastes, that feeling, your experience of it helps you to embody it and to understand it. And the physiological effects, I think it's very useful when we get into the actual treatment of disease and you understanding why we would be choosing certain tastes for certain imbalances or diseases. But that can also become apparent just over time as your understanding grows. So, the sweet taste. Sweet taste enhances love and compassion. Sweet taste has a natural affinity towards joy, happiness, and bliss. That is why the sweet taste is of holy prasad. So prasad is a food offering, traditional in India and other Asian countries. They offer up food that's generally sweet, ladus or nuts, fruits, to be blessed by the gods. They're feeding the gods first before they feed themselves. And then when you go to this service or this offering, afterwards, the people who attended will have prasad. They will eat the blessed food, and it's always sweet. Prasad means compassion, love, richness, holiness, and wholesomeness. However, excess sweet will create attachment, greed, and possessiveness. It is tempting to eat a lot of sweet, and it is addictive. I'm sure we've all experienced that. Now, the sour taste brings comprehension, appreciation, and recognition, and discrimination. Sour is sharp, so it makes the mind alert, sharp, and enhances the span of attention. However, too much sour can induce judgment, criticism, jealousy, and hate. It will make the mind agitated, hyperactive, and so discriminative that slowly the person becomes very critical. Salty enhances spirit, confidence, courage, enthusiasm, and interest. If you eat a salt-free diet for 1 month, you will experience dullness and depression and lose your creativity. An inquiring, probing mind comes from the salty taste. If you remove salt from your diet, you will feel tired, fatigued, lack of interest, and your whole life will become bland. Salty taste improves the flavor in a relationship. However, excess consumption of salt can, like sweet, create temptation, addiction, attachment, greed, possessiveness, and other kaphic disorders, as well as pitta problems, such as irritability. Now, the bitter taste. The bitter, astringent, and pungent tastes are the least found tastes in the American diet, at least. Other parts of the world, they're more prevalent, but Americans generally have a more difficult time adding pungent, bitter, and astringent. We're very familiar with sweet, sour, and salty. So bitter, psychologically, the bitter taste makes your mind celibate. You withdraw your mind from temptation, and your mind becomes more introverted. It creates aversion to desire, and you become more self-conscious and self-aware. Bitter taste can help to unfold the withdrawing of the mind and senses from the outer world into the inner world, which is introspection. So when would that be helpful? Consuming more of the bitter taste, just as an example, based on what was described just now, is if you're on a spiritual path and you need and want to turn your awareness inwards instead of your mind being constantly stimulated by all of the external movement of the world. However, too much bitter taste will make a person cynical and boring and can lead to rejection. And rejection, not in the sense of like someone rejected you, it could mean that, but it's more of like a stubbornness, even. Like you yourself reject ideas, people, you're just not very accepting. It can create aversion, separation, isolation, and loneliness. Astringent, bitter and astringent they are similar in their taste. When you're identifying bitter and astringent in food, a lot of them look similar and taste similar, but they do have different effects on the body and mind. Astringent is supportive and grounding because of the presence of earth element here. It brings things together and makes the mind collected and organized, putting everything in its right place. These are the good qualities of astringent when eaten in appropriate amounts for your own constitution. However, too much astringent taste makes the mind scattered and the person becomes disorganized. It can create insomnia, anxiety, fear, and nervousness, as well as fixation, rigidity, harshness, and emotional stagnation. Depression is also related to excessive use of astringent taste because the person holds on to emotions and becomes depressed. I'll add, it says the person holds on to emotions. That's representative of astringent's action in the body being binding. So astringent foods, astringent herbs are binding. If you put an astringent medicine on your skin, you have a wound of some sort, it binds the skin together, right? So when we say the person holds on to emotion, there's too much binding happening psychologically when we've taken too much astringent foods for too long. Pungent brings enthusiasm, vitality, and vigor. It removes obstructions and brings clarity of perception. Pungent taste is hot, sharp, and penetrating. So just with those words, can you gather which dosha the pungent taste would not be good for if we're trying to avoid like increases like? So it will help the mind probe, investigate, inquire, explore, and concentrate. However, too much pungent will make the mind angry, violent, irritable, envious, jealous, aggressive, and competitive. These are the rajasic qualities of pitta in the mind. Okay, so those are the 6 tastes: sweet, sour, salty, bitter, astringent, and pungent. So this is another helpful chart. So how to read this: these are the elements associated with the taste, and then V stands for Vata, P stands for Pitta, K stands for Kapha. The minus sign means that it pacifies or reduces the dosha, and we always reduce doshas. We're never deliberately trying to increase a dosha in order to create balance. So with this minus sign, this means that the sweet taste is good for Vata and Pitta. The plus sign means that it aggravates Kapha. It increases Kapha. Kapha already is sweet. Kapha already has earth and water element. We don't want to increase it. So this is another chart to look at choosing foods. Right, so we have this one where you can choose your foods based off of the element, right? Or you can choose your foods. Here, I guess this kind of gives you more options. You can choose your food based on the dosha, which is probably more specific, more reliable, is to choose your food based on its action on the dosha. So the work has kind of been done for you. It just tells you. Okay, so sweet. I don't know if we need to go over these exactly. Well, let's go through them. Sweet taste, most ripe fruits, sweeteners, obviously. Most grains are going to be categorized as sweet. So that means that most grains are going to reduce Vata and Pitta and increase Kapha. Milk, cream, ghee, fish, meats, fats, sweet potato, cucumber, licorice, most nuts, saffron, cardamom, and cinnamon, all considered sweet. For sour, citrus fruits, yogurt, considered sour. Cheese is generally considered sour. Tamarind, tomato, vinegar. All fermented foods, wine, strawberries, and rose hips. These are some examples. Salty, rock salt, sea salt, seaweed. Not a whole lot of options there. Just salt. Good quality salt that has not had all of the minerals stripped and caking agents added. Just make sure it's real salt. Bitter taste. Alkaloids such as coffee and nicotine, dark leafy greens, dandelion, burdock root, bitter melon, turmeric, golden seal, and fenugreek are all bitter or have a lot of bitter taste in them. Astringent, broccoli, sprouts, cauliflower, potatoes, spinach, pomegranate, cranberries, apples, pears, legumes, green tea, asparagus, cabbage, sunchoke, artichoke, lettuce, mushrooms, rye, buckwheat, and quinoa. These are all considered astringent. And keeping in mind or just taking note their effect on the doshas. Okay, and pungent, probably one of the more obvious ones next to the sweet taste and salty taste. Things that smell pungent, that taste pungent, are usually pretty pungent. Garlic, onion, fresh ginger, radish, horseradish, chilies, cloves, asafoetida, cayenne pepper, all chili peppers, mustard seeds, black pepper, wasabi. So we have one more chart. So this is another way kind of consolidating things. So we have several different charts here to go over, and just different viewpoints for understanding the same thing, but broken down. So it's not all in one thing, you just can digest one area at a time. So again, we have the dosha, we're breaking down the elements, and then the elements that balance. So we're applying the opposite. These are the gunas that are present for vata, and the gunas that balance are going to be the opposite. The best taste for vata, to balance vata, is sweet, sour, and salty. The worst taste, so the tastes that are going to aggravate vata, is pungent, bitter, and astringent. The best taste for pitta are sweet, bitter, and astringent. The worst taste, the tastes that are going to aggravate pitta, pungent, sour, and salty. Best taste for kapha, pungent, bitter, and astringent. So it's almost the same as pitta, except putting in pungent instead of sweet, because kapha, sweet taste is going to increase kapha. Sour taste, salty taste, all increases kapha. Now, something interesting about vata and kapha, they're absolute opposites. And so it's really interesting to me when you get a combination of a constitution that is vata and kapha, because it just brings up all of these interesting things when you get two absolute opposites functioning in one body and mind. And we do have all three doshas, right? But when you are dual dosha, and vata and kapha are your main ones, it's just an interesting combination. So the best tastes for vata are the worst tastes for kapha. That's what I mean by it's interesting when you get vata and kapha in one person, because generally speaking, if you were a vata person, then you would balance with these tastes, which could aggravate kapha. So if you have kapha in your constitution as well, you can't just eat a bunch of sweet, sour, and salty tastes in order to balance vata. So it makes it interesting, we'll say that. Okay. So that is what I have for you. I will let you digest and let this assimilate. And feel free to reach out with questions, clarifications. I hope you took notes or wrote down questions. All right, ta-ta for now.